One.
So this is Senate Government Operations. It is Wednesday, February 24th. And today we are looking at the outcomes for the state of Vermont. We have a set of outcomes that have been established with some minor changes. I would say we maybe actually put them into effect 10 years ago and have made some minor changes since then, but they are the aspirational goals that we have for the state of Vermont and for Vermonters. We have a couple. The Government Accountability Committee has made some changes, and I'm going to let Senator Collimore take it over from here because he's the chair of the Government Accountability Committee, and he can then introduce Sue and Drew to go through the changes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it's great to see everybody today. We had two meetings regarding this, and also a public hearing, and then a workshop that we had on Saturday. Senator Rahm, who is a new member of GAC, attended, and Senator White is also on the committee. And one of the things that we had established all the way through the process was a subgroup of folks who worked on some of the indicators that we wanted to potentially change. And then also what came out of that and what needs to be statutorily adjusted are outcome situations. So for those of you that don't know, GAC on its own, whenever it wants to, or by request of any standing committee, can change indicators which sit under the outcomes. So indicators give us some idea of how well we are doing the outcomes.
It is, but I'm in the middle of a meeting.
They provide us with some data. And so we could change those at any time. But in order to change the outcomes, we need to have a bill and legislatively change it. And so what came out of that subgroup was a desire to do that. And so with us today is Drew Ressley from the Agency of Human Services, who is the Director of Performance Improvement. I think I have that right. And Sue Zeller, who is the Chief Performance Officer for the state of Vermont. She is a member of GAC, although she doesn't get to vote, but she is the administrative representative there. And my thanks to both of those folks for hard work on that committee level. There were also two House members involved with that, Representatives Brumstead and Emily Kornheiser, who really has very big shoulders. And she had the biggest lift of all, I think. I think also, I could be wrong because I wasn't part of the subgroup, but I think Kevin Coach Christie was also a part of that at some point through the process. So I think those were the folks that were on the kind of subgroup. So Sue?
And Susanna.
I'm sorry, Susanna Davis, who's our Director of Racial Equity, is also on that subgroup. So we are going to hopefully take a look at the bill that Ameren has drafted. In my mind, I don't want to say they're minor changes because they're not, for reasons that hopefully both Sue and Drew will elucidate. They're not a lot of language changes, but I think they do refocus our efforts in terms of Government Accountability Committee. So I don't know whether Drew or Sue want to take the lead on this. Sue Zeller will, okay, and maybe explain what the changes are.
So just to give a little history to anyone that doesn't know it, the 10 outcomes were established. Oh, sorry. For the record, Sue Zeller, Chief Performance Officer, Agency of Administration. The 10 outcomes were originally set in Act 186 from the 2014 session. Since that time on outcomes, we've made a couple of wording changes here or there, but we really haven't made any major changes. So this one is an important change. When we were working with the subgroup and with the public on coming up with indicators that we could use to add into the existing outcomes report, with the goal of having comparative outcomes so that you could look at, an outcome for incarceration rates, and I'm making this up, incarceration rates for BIPOC population versus incarceration rates for the general population. And you'd want to be able to see those together so that you could see what the disparity, and when I say you, I mean the legislature and the public. So you could see the disparity and begin to ask questions about why is there a disparity, and coming up with policies or programs directed at trying to change that disparity. So when we were working on that, and it's very interesting to realize that two of our outcomes are based on small populations, small distinct populations, and shouldn't really be. And I'll let Drew go into all the reasons for that. But basically, we want to combine the one outcome that was about elders living in situations that they want, and disabled people living in situations that they want, in homes that they want. And when we were looking at disaggregating those, it became very clear that those two outcomes should not be separate, and they're too specific to be a population-wide outcome. So the committee came up with the recommendation to GAC that we were going to put a bill forward under sponsorship from GovOps to address that. So Drew, you want to take it and explain some of the reasons why?
Sure. Hey, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Drew Restley, Director of Performance Improvement at the Agency of Human Services. So as you all know, the Act 186 legislation was written according to the results-based accountability framework. And actually the 2014 statute, I think, was a sort of improved from an even earlier statute in which originally Vermont established outcomes of well-being. And so we drew from some of the language that we had used in the past, even if we weren't sure that it was going to stick forever. I'll also say that in 2014, when we were developing outcomes and indicators originally, there was a fair amount of participation from the nonprofit sector in addition to the state sector, but I would not say that there was a robust nor comprehensive or entirely inclusive process to establish those outcomes and indicators. So I think it's appropriate just in general to think about what we have as a foundation that we can now improve substantially in general. And this is one step in that direction. But I think we need to keep the bigger picture in mind and be thinking about what sort of inclusive process can the Government Accountability Committee or the legislature essentially sponsor that will enable more voices to contribute to this conversation. But to Sue's point, the results-based accountability framework is set up in such a way that we can create aspirational, as you've already said, population outcomes of well-being that set out desired conditions for all Vermonters. And they truly are intended to be aspirational so that we are starting from a place of common ground before we get into some of our differing opinions about how to actually achieve those conditions. And so it's intended to help us to create collective impact. And so the basic frame for an outcome of well-being would be all Vermonters are, or all Vermonters have, or all Vermonters experience some condition. And that's sort of the basic structure of an outcome. And the framework advises against incorporating a specific population into the outcome itself, because that can actually be accomplished through indicators, as Sue suggested. So that using actual measurable data, so trend lines that we can see over time, we can understand who in Vermont actually is achieving this outcome and who isn't, and to what extent. And how do we actually understand what the experience would be, and how do we measure what the experience would be for Vermonters who we are working towards achieving those conditions for. And so to get very specific, we have two outcomes right now, 7 and 8. Vermonters, older Vermonters live with dignity and in settings they prefer, and Vermonters with disabilities live with dignity and in settings they prefer. Both of those outcomes do include a target population, and they also include a fairly specific desired condition. And it had been a longstanding recommendation, or I guess I'll say question, maybe recommendation is too strong a word, from the Department of Disabilities, Aging, Independent Living, and the Agency of Human Services, to think about why we wouldn't just include indicators about older Vermonters and Vermonters with disabilities throughout all the other outcomes of well-being. So for instance, talking about Vermonters over certain ages in the Vermonters Are Healthy outcome, or in the Vermont families are safe, nurturing, stable, and supported. So rather than sort of silo indicators by population, we want to make sure that every population is represented fully in each outcome. So that would be the best practice of results-based accountability. And Sue, I hope that sort of accomplishes.
Yeah, I think you know, we're all learning as a group. Many of us have been doing this since 2011, I think, or 12. And you learn and your expertise grows as you go along. And one of the challenges that we have, not just us or GAC, but departments and even entire branches of state government have this, it's hard to not see yourself. So everyone wants to have their own section, you know, and so it's very difficult to get everybody to understand that if it's a generalized Vermont is healthy section, all different departments and agencies that have anything to do with health are appearing under there by definition. You don't have to have a section for the judiciary and a section for the legislature. And so we ourselves sort of tripped over this one, I'll say. And because I think, weren't these together and we split them historically? And now we're so splitting them wasn't the right thing to do either, but we think that consolidating them and rewording them to be broader and encompass the greater population under which we can do specific indicators about sub-level populations is the way to go. And so that is what's represented, can't speak this afternoon, is represented in the bill that Ameren has in front of her. So I'll let Ameren, you want to take it from there and talk about the bill at all?
Senator Rahm, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, but before we walk through the bill, I know, Drew, that you referenced not a particularly robust public participation process in the past. I'd love for you to talk about your analysis of the public participation process this time, because this is a huge deal. This is the mission and theory of change, essentially, for the state. This is a way for Vermonters to hold themselves accountable to this. You have places like New Hampshire that have whole public participation agencies and do things like New Hampshire Listens, et cetera. I don't see any of that so far. So I think it's really dangerous to talk about these outcomes without discussing the public participation that has not occurred.
So Drew, do you mind if I take that?
Sure.
Thank you. So part of the charge in Act 154 last year was that the Chief Performance Officer, the Director of Racial Diversity, and the SEC, as represented by Coach Christie, join in a group with the subgroup with other members to come up with recommendations to GAC for BIPOC indicators. And as Senator Rahm said, part of it, the challenge was the bifurcated session last year. So the actual bill, or the Act 154, didn't get out until the end of September, wasn't signed into law until early October. And it left us really insufficient time to try to meet the March 1st deadline of making the recommendations. Emily, Representative Kornheiser, and Drew and the committee worked really hard to try to make this as broadly participated in as possible, but frankly, we didn't achieve that. So the recommendation letter that we're still crafting is due back to GAC on the 1st, and it's going to say that we recommend that we disaggregate the existing indicators, which, certain existing indicators which we're listing, and that will be incorporated into the upcoming report that the Chief Performance Office does in September, but that over the summer, GAC work either, get an outside facilitator or something, but we have to broaden the participation. It was really less than robust. If we're going to make recommendations, we're not comfortable, none of us are comfortable with the amount of public participation we had. And so we're not comfortable using that little bit of data and input to make recommendation. So we as a committee feel we tried our best, but we really did not achieve the goal, which was to get broad participation from the communities and organizations. So we're not going to make recommendations to add indicators specific to the BIPOC population, except for disaggregating existing ones that are already there that we know that should be disaggregated. So we're going to ask GAC to spend the summer doing a better job of this. Drew, you want to?
No, before Drew does, can I just say that we're dealing with two different things here.
Yes, that's
We're
correct.
not dealing with the indicators at all today.
No, that's right.
That's not what we're
That's
dealing
actually
with.
my question. I don't know what the public process was about changing the outcomes. I don't think there was any.
Well, we could have input, I guess, from people. I do not want to start changing. I think it's folly for us to start changing all of the outcomes.
We are changing them, and we've had
We're
no
changing-
public process around that.
Yes, we're changing one word in one, and we're combining two outcomes we're not changing those outcomes. We're combining them. So I guess we could have public input into this if we wanted to.
I think the outcomes are of great importance to Vermonters, and those are really substantive changes. And so that's what I was asking, is there has been no public process on changing the outcomes.
That's our responsibility in this committee, is to have that public input. So if any, before March 12th, we can have public input on it. We can open it up and we can have people come in and testify.
What did I miss is happening on March 12th that we have such a
Crossover.
Okay. That's the short deadline with a week.
It is a short deadline, but, and I don't, Senator Collmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I saw Drew's hand up, so I want to go to her.
Yep.
I'll just mention a couple of things, Senator. I know you had sent an email at one point about the possibility of delaying what we did on Saturday past March 1st. The issue there would have been the optics of it. I think the GAC committee didn't feel like that was a good idea to sort of put off what we were charged with doing statutorily. In other words, we wanted to step up to the plate and do our best to do what we were supposed to do by the date that we were given, rather than sort of kick the can down the road and not do anything until later. And I think that's an important consideration. The other thing I'll mention, as Senator White mentioned, and I'm perfectly willing to take testimony, but we risk not making crossover with a bill if we do that, because we have to basically get it out of this committee and it's got to go to the other body by that day if it's a policy question, in order for it to get acted on this year.
I will make this pledge. We have it on our schedule again on Friday. If people want to come in, and we're not going to talk about indicators.
So in 2
At
days,
all.
in 2 days. you mean.
No, let me finish. We have it on our schedule on Friday. We also have a week when we come back to finish things up. We could spend most of Wednesday looking at this issue. But I think that, and I guess we can open it up completely and have people testify on all of the outcomes if they want to, but we're going to ask them to testify on this bill, these two outcomes that are being changed.
There are 3, to my knowledge, being changed.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 2. We've combined 2 and we've added a word to another one.
I don't know how that constitutes public process, but I'm willing.
Well, I don't know how else to do public process. And I am sorry, but okay, never mind. Drew?
Thank you for letting me chime in here. I think that there is value in changing the outcomes and indicators because they do set a common and measurable agenda for the state of Vermont. And in theory, it allows the nonprofit sector, the state sector, the business sector, community organizations, all to align their efforts towards something measurable. And that has a lot of value. And I think we perhaps have not done a good enough job to date in the legislative and executive branches spreading the word about how to use Act 186 and how to get involved. I think if we had, we might have seen more public participation in the public hearing and the workshop that GAC did host around the indicators. And so I say that just because I think that it's appropriate to be, I think, to ask questions about whether or not we could, with the time before March 12th, invite enough people who would come and really participate meaningfully. I would actually recommend that we think about both outcomes and indicators, even though they have different processes for actually being established as changes over the summer. I would follow Sue's recommendation that the Government Accountability Committee essentially manage or shepherd a facilitation process, maybe with an outside facilitator who can really spend time bringing stakeholders to the table, whether it's Zoom or in person, to have discussions around outcomes and indicators together. And I think that if we rush, I'm not exactly sure what the urgency is for rushing the changes with the outcomes, to be honest. And to Senator Rahm's point, we did not have an open process to visit the outcomes. It really kind of came up peripherally in our conversations about the indicators. And so while I'm happy to see movement around Act 186 in this committee, I don't know that I would advocate for making a change without public process involving more even than just testimony. So I hope that was clear. But I would actually, if there's an opportunity to recommend waiting for the summer to revisit outcomes and indicators together in a public process, that's what AHS would advocate for.
So to put off everything until summer?
As Sue said, I think we are committing to exploring, as the executive branch, how to disaggregate as many indicators as we possibly can in the current Act 186 report. And that would be a substantial improvement from what is there now in terms of understanding racial inequities and disparities, but that we shouldn't move forward beyond that until a more robust public process in summer 2021 to invite stakeholders to help inform how we would improve Act 186 holistically through an equity lens.
So we just would put off this bill until and just not do anything this year?
That's the recommendation that I'm putting on the table, but
okay.
I see Sue raising her hand too.
Senator Polina? You're muted.
Sorry about that. I was actually going to ask the same question that Jeanette just asked. Does it mean putting off this bill for now? And you said, yes, that's your recommendation. So that was my question.
If I understand that correctly, if I understand the options correctly.
And I think Sue, I saw you shake your head and you're muted.
Our process does not prevent us, or not putting this bill through this session does not prevent us from disaggregating and making recommendations to GAC to disaggregate the existing indicators under the outcomes where they're at this time. We might not be able to, do a couple of indicators because of the awkward nature of these couple of outcomes, but that can wait another year. We have plenty of indicators that we need to meet with departments and see how if they're collecting the data, and if not, how they could collect the data. And so there's plenty to do on figuring out and appropriately disaggregating the existing indicators. So that won't slow down the process of the goal of being able to report disaggregated indicators for the BIPOC population.
I'm completely confused because are we talking? I think we all agree that we need to put off the general conversation about indicators until summer.
That was outcomes.
Yeah. No, I said indicators. We have all agreed, I believe, that we need to put off the conversation about indicators until summer when we can. Let me finish. And are we also saying that we need to completely begin to relook at all of our outcomes over the summer and to establish new outcomes? That there are two separate things here, and I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, because I believe that we've all agreed that your letter will come to us about disaggregating information about in the indicators, and that will the guts of that work will be done over the summer and come later at a later date and come back. But are we also talking about re-looking at the 10 outcomes and rethinking what those outcomes should be? That's my question.
Can I make a clarification here? So there's actually 3 issues on the table. One could have been done 20 years ago without any legislation, which is disaggregating all of our major state indicators by race.
Yes.
What I hope we focus on this year is, do we need money and infrastructure to actually disaggregate all of that information by race and gender and other identity groups? So I would hope that's a conversation I want to have, is let's disaggregate all of our current indicators by race, and let's figure out if government has the tools to do that. Then there's a question about, we have hundreds of indicators. We have lots of indicators. Or can we narrow them so that in the future we're looking at more engine lights, as we might say, for what really tells us we're going in the right direction or not on some of these things? That, I think, is a medium-term conversation. I personally don't see talking about the outcomes as putting it off. I think a robust public process coming out of a pandemic is an incredible opportunity to have Vermonters share in a public process that never happened around the outcomes of quality of life in Vermont after they've had a lot of time to think about that in an ongoing emergency. So that's what I'm putting out there, but I in no way want to slow down disaggregation by race and other identity markers of the data that we have in state government.
Right.
So where are we? I still am confused, because I think that if there are some things that will be disaggregated, we know that, right? That's already being suggested. Whether we disaggregate every single indicator, I think, is a different discussion. And then, so what we have before us now is 3 changes to the outcomes. Are we saying we should not make those changes to the outcomes without more public input? And if we have public input, is it just about those changes to the outcomes, or are we opening it up to looking at all of the outcomes and changing those? And I do have to say that there weren't a lot of individuals involved in this conversation, but we have been working on these outcomes for many years, and there have been many, many, many groups involved in the conversations over those years. Many. It started when Diane Snelling was still in the Senate, and we've been taking testimony for all those years. So, Senator Clarkson, you had a comment.
Yeah, I would take all of you, those of you who serve on this committee, and I know Keisha's new to the committee, but I'd take Sue and Drew and Brian and Keisha now, your recommendations on, is this a good time to open it up and review all of these aspects of it? I mean, when was the last, I mean, it's just 7 years. We're just 7 years into it. It's not like we've hit a 10-year mark to open it all up, but is this an appropriate moment to open it up and actually review some of our assumptions? And I mean, I guess that's my question to you is.
Drew?
Sue and I have talked about this a lot. And I think the answer to your question, Senator Clarkson, is yes. I think Senator Rahm's point about coming out of a pandemic and also a national and certainly in-state reckoning with racial injustice, I think it's the perfect time to say, what are we committing to as a state? There's also non-state efforts like the Vermont Center for Rural Development has undertaken with the Vermont Proposition work. So I think it's a good time to take a step back and say, how do we want to articulate our overriding vision for the state and who needs to be involved in doing that? And so I think to clarify, because I can see how these threads are getting confused, I think it's true that Sue on March 1st will be sending recommendations that include the executive branch committing to, by the September 2022 one report, disaggregating as many indicators as we can by at least race, if not also by gender and other identity characteristics. And then, so that's happening on March 1st, we'll make those recommendations. I think to your point about these three outcomes on the table, and to Senator Clarkson's question, I think that summer 2021 would be a good time for the Government Accountability Committee to open up a robust facilitated stakeholder engagement process to look at both the outcomes and the indicators. And so we may decide to keep a number of indicators that are now disaggregated that we think are really meaningful. But to Senator Rahm's point, we may also realize that there's a bunch of things we're measuring that are not helping us better understand the very different experience of Vermonters across the state. And so we may want to make wholly fresh recommendations at the end of summer 2021 to the Senate and the House GovOps committees about the outcomes and also what indicators we believe should fall under them.
Right. I'm as I listen to this conversation, I think this may be the watershed moment for that review and regrouping.
Sue?
Well, part of me, my hair is standing up because I'm going, we're going to change everything. But we always have to be open to changing these. Although, you have to fight the urge to change everything constantly, because then you never get a consistent, a particular measure or outcome or results over time, which is where you can really see the trend. So,
right.
Half empty, half full, but we've been doing this, as you say, since 2014. So it probably is. And I think people are comfortable now with the process and understand it much better. I think about how departments would have reacted if 2 years or 3 years into this, we changed everything. And, we've had our challenges, as you all well know, in getting departments to understand and accept and train and get all of this. So, but I think it is a good time to relook at it. And I'm confident that we'll keep, the vast number, maybe even, or certainly a lot of the existing indicator, because they're pretty broad in general. And they're in the areas that you care about: the economy, the health of the population, the environment, things like that. So I don't have, but my hair, is it still standing up?
So I would suggest then that we just drop this topic for now. Senator Clarkson?
I don't want your hair standing on end, Sue Zeller, but I have run a longitudinal study since 2087, and I know the integrity of over time being able to
Right.
view exactly the same questions. I get that, but we are very bad on our longitudinal study. We do add quite a few things, so
That's
it's
true.
gotten longer and longer. But I also appreciate that things change and humans resist change, even though it's the one thing we're guaranteed. It's like we resist it so fully. So I wish you good luck balancing all those truisms and life realities.
Story of my life.
I will tell you, you have no idea the battles that were fought about even coming up with 10 population outcomes that are really aspirational and kind of apple pie. That's what the outcomes are, is they say, this is where we would like to be as a state. And it took a long time to come up with what we thought we wanted to be as a state. So, we can relook at that and see what it is that we might think differently now about where we want to be as a state.
And we may want to be in many of the same places, but looking at different aspects of how we get there.
Well, those are the indicators. So, and unfortunately, one of the things that we ran into, and we're going to have to be very deliberative about this with a lot of input from people, is the understanding the difference between an outcome and an indicator. Right. And that's a huge difference. And it took 10 years to get legislators to understand the difference. And so when people start thinking about indicators and wanting those to be the outcomes, anyway, it'll be an interesting process.
I think people still want to be happy and economically secure. I mean, I mean, we may have different ways of getting there, but I think some of the big outcomes we want will not change.
No, I agree. Yep.
Okay, so Senator.
So it's the second day in a row we've decided to drop a bill.
Mm-hmm.
And we've also dropped retirement. We're just
Right.
dropping things right and left.
We can't retire?
No,
What?
we're
You dropped
deferring. The
retirement.
house is going first.
We're going down the route of less government, right?
We're deferring to the House to start the process.
On retirement, we're not dropping that topic, but we're just letting them take the lead on it.
Yeah, we want to see 150 people get into agreement before 30 take their.
So Senator Collmore,
Yes,
are you okay with this?
I'm fine. If that's what we want to do, I'm all for it.
Okay.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, if it means we see more of Sue and Drew, that's not a bad thing.
Amen.
No, that's not. And hopefully it'll be in person.
Wouldn't that be
Senator
nice?
Rahm?
I think the one thing that I would like to see come out of this session, and it could be done through GAC, is that we have a budget to have a real public participation process over the summer and beyond. You really can't do this well without some resources. And it sounds, being new to GAC, like there has been no money to do a public process. So I don't know if there's a way for our committee to recommend an appropriation for this process to take place, but I think that's what needs to come out of this session if we're going to do a better job than we have in the past.
Well, Sue's office has a budget.
Yeah, and you're
not-
looking at it. You're looking at my budget. But I would, as I said it to the GAC committee, and telling tales out of school. I know Steve Klein's got money put aside. He always has money left over every year. And that's how he does all those studies they do. So, just like grab some of that.
So I'm happy to keep.
But I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
You did. We didn't hear anything.
Okay,
We didn't hear anything. So I guess what we can do is try and figure out what it might take, what it might look like.
Yep.
And go from there.
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
may I add one thing?
Yes.
Drew, I love the fact that you mentioned that Matt Dunn Center on Rural Innovation and Center on Rural, I think you mentioned another Center on Rural Studies or something.
Development. Yeah. Paul
Because
Costello.
we
Okay,
now
yeah.
we now have resources we never had in 2014 and really good ones. And
Right.
that would be, great to, and we have the engagement of huge communities that quite a large number of people that we also didn't have as engaged in 2014.
So I'm going to end this conversation. I realize we are about half an hour over our time. And I didn't realize that because I was expecting a call at 2:00. I told Senator Polina that he would have to take over at 2:00 when somebody arrives at my house for me to sign a paper. So I didn't think it was 2 yet. So we're going to end this conversation now, and we'll take it. We can take it up again on Friday and continue the discussion about where we go and how we how we work with the GAC committee and get some public participation over the summer. Is that okay with everybody?
Sure.
Okay, great. So I do see that. Thank you, Drew and Sue. Oh, Drew and Sue.
Drew and Sue.
Drew and Sue.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, yeah.
It's Drew.
So I see that we have Paul here, and I know he has to leave shortly to pick up his child. So we're going to move to S51, which is a bill that we passed last year that we had a lot of discussion about, and then one day Betsy Ann Rask came in and tipped the whole thing on its head, and suddenly it made sense. So S51 is a bill that would limit who can contribute to political campaigns. So Paul, would you like to, I don't know if it's even posted, because
It's on our website.
Yeah.
it is. Okay.
It's in bills in our committee.
Okay. Oh, yes, it is. That it was, because I was thinking it was from last year, but no, you're right. Okay, S51, yes. Okay, so Paul, would you like to?
I would, and thanks so much for your consideration, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, or VPIRG. Again, appreciate your allowing me to speak early on the list here so I can pick up my son. The legislation, the bill S51, as you noted, Madam Chair, is a reconsideration of a bill that passed last year with strong support in the Senate. The Senate has actually passed it one or two additional times in similar fashion before that. So some members of your committee are very familiar with this idea. Credit goes to Betsy Ann Rask for the formulation of this legislation. But let me say that VPIRG has been working on these issues of democracy, how to engage more people in the government process, and how to limit the very wealthy influences over elected officials and over the elections process. And this bill is an important step forward in that effort. The bill, as noted, would place limits on campaign contributions from entities other than an individual, a political committee, or a political party. Another way of saying that, or most notably, this would prevent corporations from making direct contributions to candidates and political parties, as it is written here. And it would prevent others, unions, etc. But rather than trying to define all of those different ways of defining a corporation, for instance, and there are many. Betsy Ann had the very thoughtful and effective idea of just saying who can contribute. And if you're not an individual, a person or a trust controlled by a single person, or a political committee or a political party, then you cannot give under this legislation to candidates or to the political party. We strongly favor this, and I'll just speak briefly to some of those reasons why. As noted again, this prohibition essentially on giving from corporations is an idea that's been around for a long time. According to data from the National Conference of State Legislatures, which this committee has found useful to look at in the past, some 22 states completely prohibit corporations from contributing to political campaigns. The federal government has also banned direct corporate contributions to federal candidates for more than 100 years. At the other end of the spectrum, 6 states, Alabama, Missouri, Nebraska, Oregon, Utah, and Virginia, allow corporations to contribute unlimited amounts of money to state campaigns. Of the remaining 22 states, 19 impose the same limits on corporations in terms of contributions from corporations as they do on contributions from people. And the other 3 set different limits for individuals and corporations. As you know, Vermont currently treats corporations the same way it treats human beings in terms of the political contributions that each is allowed to make. But, and this is important, corporations are not human beings, and we believe strongly that they should not be afforded the same opportunities to influence elections. Consider the words of President Teddy Roosevelt on this topic of corporate contributions from his 1905 address to Congress. I'll read just one paragraph here. President Roosevelt says, all contributions by corporations to any political committee for any political purpose should be forbidden by law. Directors should not be permitted to use stockholders' money for such purposes. And moreover, a prohibition of this kind would be, as far as it went, an effective method of stopping the evils aimed at corrupt practices acts. Not only should this be both national and the several state legislatures forbid any officer of a corporation from using the money of the corporation in or about any election, but they should also forbid such use of money in connection with any legislation save by the employment of counsel in a public manner distinctly for legal services. All right, the point there is that President Roosevelt recognized the potentially corrupting influence of corporate money in the process. His remarks, which were repeated again the following year, led to the passage of the Tillman Act in 1907, which prohibited corporations from making monetary contributions to national political campaigns for the first time. Now, it's well known that corporations have certain advantages over human beings, such as limited liability and unlimited life. As a matter of public policy, we have created those benefits for corporate entities. But these advantages were intended to allow the marketplace to flourish. They were not intended to be used by corporations in order to allow them to exercise undue influence over the political process. Now, admittedly, it's not just corporate money that corrupts our political process. We know that big money from individuals is certainly a problem as well. But the Supreme Court has limited our options in terms of curtailing contributions from individuals. But the court has repeatedly found that bans on direct corporate contributions to candidates and political parties stands on firm constitutional ground. Most recently, the US Supreme Court declined to hear a case out of Massachusetts, the 1A Auto Inc. versus Sullivan, and that was in May of 2019. That case involved a challenge to the constitutionality of a state law in Massachusetts banning corporate contributions to state and local campaigns. The ban there had been previously upheld by a 2018 Supreme Judicial Court opinion in Massachusetts. The decision by the US Supreme Court not to hear the case out of Massachusetts leaves intact the ability of state and federal government to regulate direct political contributions from corporations. So the question may come, does money actually have a corrupting influence in the political process? Here, I'll cite the words of former Governor Howard Dean in his 1997 inaugural address, where he said, quote, "Money does buy access, and we're kidding ourselves and Vermonters if we deny it," end quote. Some states such as Connecticut have endured terrible corruption scandals, as you know. One scandal there led to their governor, John Rowland, receiving 2 prison terms on various corruption charges. It also led to that state's adoption of public financing for elections and a ban on corporate contributions. Connecticut also limits the number of PACs that a corporation can establish, something that you may want to consider one day if you think that made sense. We do support the requirement that PACs carry the name of their corporate sponsor if they have one. This is a step towards transparency that would help to address the problem of money flowing to PACs rather than direct contributions to candidates. And here I should add, this is new testimony for me because I'm adding that my own organization established a coordinated political committee in 2020 for the first time in our 48-year history. We called it VPIRG Votes, and in this respect, it serves as a model for what that transparency requirement in this bill would mandate. We did this, adding in the VPIRG as part of the name. We did that voluntarily because we think it makes sense for people to know if a political committee is associated with an existing corporate entity. So in conclusion, I'll say S51 may not be the only solution we need to fix the problem of money in politics, but we think it is an essential ingredient. VPIRG also supports public financing and creating incentives for small dollar contributions. Last year, as you know, Madam Chair, the Senate passed a bill to study possible improvements to our moribund public financing system. The goals would be to increase voter engagement and participation, encourage candidates to court small dollar contributions from their constituents, provide a means for more voters to donate to their preferred candidates, and have a high level of public satisfaction. We believe it would make sense to combine that concept or that study of how to make public financing work with this legislation to limit who can give to candidates. It's kind of two sides of the same coin. I don't know whether that's possible or conceivable at this late date, but conceptually, we do believe that it makes sense. But as a bottom line, we encourage you to pass S51, pass this legislation again. We will promise to work very hard over in the House side to see if they can take it up this year. Last year, the House Government Operations Committee actually passed it out. That was progress, but it did not make it to the floor of the House for a vote in the midst of the COVID challenges. So I will stop there, and thanks again very much for allowing me to speak.
So I think that what makes sense now is to have, we had Paul go first because he has to leave, but to have Ameren walk us through the bill actually, so that we can see what it is. Senator Polina?
Just a quick question. I forget, remind me, we passed the bill or part of the bill that called for a study of public financing. What happened to that? Was that a separate? I just don't remember what stream that went down.
That was S32 last year, Senator Polina. The what is now S51, that was S47 last year. So yes, they were two different bills. S47 was taken up and passed by government operations, but never made it to the floor. S32, which is this study of public financing, was never taken up in a formal way by committee. So it stayed on the wall in House government operations.
Okay, thanks.
I believe that's, somebody could check me, but I believe that's what happened.
I think you're right. And I just fear that combining them will make this one more controversial and maybe not get us where we want to go. But
did the House Government Operations Committee passed out the corporate bill, the one we're looking at now? Did they change it much, or was it basically the same? Sorry to put the burden on you to remember all this stuff, but
well, they took out parties, right?
One important change was that they took out the prohibition on contributions to parties.
Oh, that's right. I remember that now. Yeah,
the scope just to candidates. That was an important thing that the House did.
I remember that now.
So, yes, Senator Clarkson?
Paul, sadly, holding up the federal government as a model for not accepting corporate contributions is hard to do with a straight face. I mean, I'm sorry, they still are, you know, it doesn't appear that that has had any effect. Because, and I mean, my challenge is we still enable so much inappropriate and corrupting influence to flow freely that I'm all supportive of this bill. And I somehow failed to co-sponsor it this year, but I helped last year and we passed it out. But I just wish I saw more evidence of this actually curtailing any corporate influence on political figures.
I would just say we certainly are limited by what the Supreme Court allows here, and that is a significant challenge. So we do hope that investigation of the flip side of this, because while we can't ban all that we might want to, we could do more to encourage better, more thoughtful ways of funding our campaigns. And I understand the time constraints here, and we'll try in the House side if we can't get it done now. But that study of public financing, that's one thing that is left to us for sure.
So I also think that this is one of the reasons why Betsy Ann flipped it this way, because if you look at the when we were dealing with this before, if you look at the federal guidelines around corporate contributions, it's 137 pages long. Those are the guidelines. And it is so convoluted that if you wear blue socks on Tuesday, you can give a corporate contribution, but if you wear green socks on Wednesday, you can't. I mean, that is an exaggeration, but it is almost that arcane. So that was the brilliance of flipping it this way.
No, I think it was great to flip it. I wish I saw more progress and was more encouraged. Sorry.
Well, we don't have any control over the feds, but we do have control over the state, and that's where we should put our emphasis, our resources.
Yeah, I agree.
So, thank you, Paul.
Have fun.
Amron, do you want to walk us through the bill?
Yes. Does everyone have S51 on their secondary devices?
Secondary devices. Aren't you funny?
Yes.
On our secondary or thirdly or fourthly.
Thank you.
For the record, Amron Abergele, Office of Legislative Counsel. S51, as has been mentioned, is the same as S47, the version that was passed by the Senate last year, with the exception of the effective date, which was pushed out. So S51 is a bill that proposes to provide that only individuals, political committees, and political parties may make a contribution to a candidate or to a political party. Section 1 amends Title 17, Section 2901. This is the start of the campaign finance chapter in Title 17. And it amends the definition of political committee or political action committee, as you will see going down onto page 2, to include any entity that registers as a political committee pursuant to Section 2922 of this chapter prior to reaching the $1,000 threshold. And you'll see that Section 2922 is amended in the next section, Section 2. In Subdivision A1A, each political committee shall register with the Secretary of State's office within 10 days of making expenditures of $1,000 or more and accepting contributions of $1,000 or more, and any other political committee may register with the Secretary of State prior to reaching those $1,000 thresholds. A political committee's name shall include the full name of its connected organization, if applicable, and any clearly recognized abbreviation or acronym by which the connected organization is commonly known. In its registration, a political committee shall, and then you'll see there's the addition of, on page 3, Romanet 4, if applicable, the full name of its connected organization and any clearly recognized abbreviation or acronym. And if you continue scrolling down to page 4, you'll see the definition of connected organization, which means the formal or informal committee of 2 or more individuals, corporation, labor organization, public interest group, or other entity that directly or indirectly establishes, administers, or financially supports a political committee. And then for purposes of this section, financially supports is defined as not including contributions to the political committee, but does include the payment of establishment, administration, and solicitation costs of the political committee. And members of a connected organization, such as organizations that or individuals who are members of a trade association, labor organization, or public interest group that is a connected organization, shall not be considered to have directly or indirectly established, administered, or financially supported the connected organization's political committee. Moving down to section 3 on page 5, this is Title 17, Section 2941, Limitations of Contributions. And you will see if you continue scrolling down onto page 6 that there is the addition of subsection C1A, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, only an individual, a political committee, or a political party may make a contribution to a candidate or to a political party. Moving on to page 7, Subdivision B, in accordance with the provisions of Subdivision A, an individual may make a contribution as follows: in the individual's capacity as an unincorporated sole proprietorship, or from his or her revocable trust if the individual is a named trustee. A candidate or a political party shall not accept a contribution from any person other than those permitted to make such a contribution under subdivision 1 of this subsection. And in section 4, we have the effective date on page 8, and this act would take effect on December 11th, 2022.
Thank you.
Why does
Any
it say
questions?
December 11th?
Huh?
Why does it say December 11th? Where did December 11th come in?
Because that's the beginning of the new
Next election cycle.
The cycle, it's the cycle date.
Just seems sort of random.
But it was also to see if you were like fully here.
So I was paying attention.
Yeah,
I was reading
exactly.
along.
Yeah, perfect.
Any questions for Ameren? Senator Collmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm remembering this from last year. I just looked up actually the votes on it, et cetera. What, if anything, would prevent, if I own a company, the Ajax Motor Company, what would prevent me from having the treasurer of that company write me a check as an individual, as the owner, and then taking that money and out of my own personal account, making a contribution to a candidate? Is there anything in this bill that would prohibit that?
I guess you'd have to answer to your company about whether you were paid legitimately $1,000. Ameren?
If you look at page 7,
Yeah.
there is the restriction that a candidate or political party shall not accept a contribution from any person other than those permitted to make a contribution under subdivision 1 of the subsection. I think the point you raise is a good one. I didn't see anything in here that would explicitly says you cannot do that, but a political candidate or political party is not allowed to accept a contribution that from someone who is not an individual, a political party, or a political committee.
Right. But I think Brian's
if
point is you'd have no way of knowing.
You'd have, right. I mean, it could be your paycheck, it could be your bonus, and you can spend that any way you want.
Right. And you are an individual.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I mean,
we're
there's,
not
but
not prohibiting
presumably your
individuals.
board of trustees or whoever, if you're the sole owner, you can do whatever you want with it. But if you have partners or anything else, they're going to question why you got that $1,000 check. Was it for something you did, or did you bribe the treasurer, or what? So you'd have to answer to your corporation, not to
Understood.
the, yeah.
Understood. But all I'm saying is, I think creative
Yeah.
people will still find ways around this.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you have to answer to your own conscience.
Well,
Oh, yeah, but if I owned a company and I fully supported a candidate, I could certainly arrange for myself to be
sure.
able to get a check from the company and do whatever I wanted with it.
Sure, you could.
Okay.
And we can't say that you can't do that because we don't care where your money comes from. I mean, we do care where your money comes from, but we don't really care where your money comes from. We care that you're a person that's giving the money. But Senator Rahm, did you have?
I'm just trying to understand how this affects in-kind contributions, like a bookstore or a restaurant wants to allow you, or a cafe wants to allow you to do a small gathering there. That does constitute a material in-kind contribution. Is that affected by this bill?
That I would need to look at the rest of the campaign finance regulations to know for sure.
I think those are valuable. I just want to say, like, I think the interactions that we have in small businesses, sometimes in smaller communities where they don't have a lot of places open after hours, is really valuable. So if it does misalign with this bill in some way, I'd like to see that carved out.
I will make a note to look into that.
And I think that Will could probably answer that for us also. And so we'll make sure he gets that question.
Because I also try to report those properly. I think it would just make people misreport those, because that's not something you could say was an individual contribution if they were like, yes, come use my cafe at 7:30 in the morning to talk to people.
Well, I don't think that if you're using the cafe and you're the only one there, then it might be an in-kind contribution. But if they give you a corner of the restaurant in the morning.
Right, but both could happen, right? They might say, yeah, we'll open on Friday night, so you can have a conversation.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Okay. I think we'll check that out.
They might say, we'll put our staff out there for free. Like, we'll have a couple staff people there. I think those are really valuable for folks.
Any other questions for Amarin?
I think I have one. Going back up to the top, when we talk about the political committees and there's the registration and whatnot, most of that, and it says that you could, it includes committees that whether or not they raised and spent $1,000 or not. I mean, that's just saying I'm just wondering, what's the importance of that? In other words, it's basically just saying that PACs have to register, not right? And better identify themselves. I'm just trying to understand if I'm missing something more. That's not a very clear question.
I think I see where you're going. I, unfortunately, as you know, was not here for the first round of this last year.
Right.
I will say that as the language is presently written, this would allow political committees to register prior to reaching to that $1,000 limit, which then may mean that they can then qualify as an entity that is permitted to contribute.
Because PACs are still allowed to contribute.
Yes.
Just not corporations, but PACs are.
Right.
We're not coming out against PACs, and this bill is not restricting the activities of PACs, except to have them better identify themselves.
Correct.
And I think the thought behind that was that really what PACs are is a group of individuals who come together for a particular issue or candidate or purpose.
But then there are corporate PACs.
And they would have to be identified. If you, like Paul said, VPIRG votes, you can't say Vermonters for Happy Families. You have to say Vermont Yankees for families for happier Vermonters or something. I mean, you'd have to identify who was the.
That gets back to the registration idea. You have to better identify yourself when you register.
Any other questions?
I'm just trying to remember. We actually passed that in 19, I think, because that's why we were so frustrated. Yes, we passed it in 19. Because it was so frustrating because it sat on the wall for the second half of 19 and then I guess some of 20, and they passed it. I'm just trying to recall when we had this conversation.
We actually had some pretty long conversations about corporate contributions, if I remember
We
correctly.
did.
Like, some of them went on and on and on and on.
Yep. And it was tied in also to our revised disclosure form because
Right.
we also talked about that at the same time.
And a lot of times we had conversations where other senators were saying, so now you're going to make me do this, you're going to make me do this. And we had to keep saying, no, you already have to do that. That's already in the law. We're not changing that.
Yeah.
That was, I will never forget that. I was reporting a campaign finance bill and Shumlin was the pro tem. And people said, you mean I have to put on my signs?
Right.
Paid for by? And I said, you already have to do that. And there was so much contention on the floor that Shumlin pulled the bill.
Yep.
Yeah, we passed it out of the Senate on the 13th, on the 13th of March, a year before COVID hit, on the 13th of March, 2019.
Well, we will, the issue over there, I believe, was from the parties. And we will invite all three parties when we take this up again, which I believe will be on, I'm completely losing my grip, but I think.
Join the club.
Are you looking at our agenda? Is that what you're trying to?
Yeah, I'm
remember?
trying to find where I have this. No, I mean, I'm looking at my pieces of paper
Madam
here.
Chair,
Yes, thank you, Gail.
the parties were invited today, all of them.
Yep. And we'll make sure they're invited again next time.
Okay.
Thank
So the
you.
House wanted to make sure that political parties could accept larger donations or make larger donations.
No, accept contributions from corporations.
Right. That's what I meant to say. Yep.
Yeah.
That's what they wanted.
That's what they wanted.
All of them, I think.
All the House, you mean?
All the parties.
Oh, all the parties.
Even your beloved Progressive Party, I believe, supported that.
I don't know if I love any political party, actually.
No, but I I'm curious. I say that, but I'm not, it'd be interesting to know if all three parties, major parties supported it.
Progressive
I
Party
have
doesn't
no
take
idea.
corporate donations, though.
Madam Chair.
Candidates or the
Senator
party don't
Rahm.
take corporate contributions.
Sorry. Unless I'm missing it, is corporations is not defined in this bill. It's defined somewhere else in chapter 17 or?
Right, but we
That's
don't
correct.
have to define corporations because
We're saying who can give rather than. who
Right. We turned
Right.
it around.
that's why it was tipped on its head, is because it's easier and I will just relate this one little incident in one of the primaries that I was in. This was one of the issues that we had talked about, and one of the opponents in the primary was very thought we should not be accepting corporate contributions, and he said, I would never accept a corporate contribution. And they asked me, and I said, I don't know. I might. I have limited resources. And afterwards, I said to the person, I said, you really need to be careful about saying you will never accept a corporate contribution, because you remember you took from that, it was a farm, but it was incorporated. And I said, you took from a contribution from that corporation. And he said, oh yeah, but that isn't the kind of corporation I meant. I meant like Monsanto. I said, a corporation is a corporation, and we have LLCs and LLPs and limited liability. So that's why we tipped it up on its head.
So instead of defining corporation, we just said, we defined who can give money to candidates, which is people, PACs, and parties.
Right.
So do you all, in your intent in the past, did you mean financial or did you mean to include in kind? Because sometimes someone might do a training for you and they might be a sole proprietor of a consultancy, they might offer you something in kind that is, you would, unless you were gonna, I would say, fudge the rules and call it a personal contribution, it's more appropriate to list it as an in-kind contribution from a business.
I don't know that we had that conversation. I think we have to talk with Will about that, because I feel, I'm not sure where you would draw the line.
Yeah.
If a corporation decided to give you 3 campaign aids as an in-kind contribution, or to give you headquarters,
Right.
or
Give you an office.
yeah, I mean, I don't know where we draw the line, so I think we need to talk with Will about how that would work out.
I would like to let's say, for example, we just started an effort to train BIPOC candidates to run for office unannounced, but let's say we started doing trainings for them in the future with like really high value consultancies. Do they have to report that in any way if they do one-on-one training?
Are they a candidate?
Maybe it's after they're an elected official.
Yeah. No. If they're an elected official and they're taking training.
And they're doing training on public speaking for their campaign.
But they've already run the election. They're not a candidate.
We're always candidates.
No.
Yes, between January and December 11th, you're not a candidate.
I mean, you can declare to be a candidate, but
I think it's a gray area, Keisha, and I think we need to talk about it. I actually think it does have influence. I mean, what we're trying to get at is influence. And so, trainings are great, but we also have trainings, we could also figure out who pays for them else, in a more direct individual way. I mean, I think influence is influence, and undue influence is what we're trying to avoid.
But I would think there's some of those things we want to report, but not get rid of.
well, I think we'll talk to Will about what that means. But I do think that, and really you're not a candidate, because you're only a candidate when you either declare or you've raised or spent a certain amount of money. Then you're a candidate.
Right. But we've all done that if we're in office generally.
I
know we're going to hear.
I think that's even more confusing than.
I guess some people continue to raise money continuously.
Ask Peter Welch about that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, if you've raised or spent $500 in the cycle, then you are a candidate. Yes.
And you're concerned, Keisha, not saying you're concerned, but what we're talking about is that if you're a candidate and somebody wants to give you something like a rent, like a space to put on an event, that would be seen as a corporate contribution.
Well, my
that could be
concern
seen
is
as corporate.
Yeah, and I'd rather they report that than try to figure out a way to say that the business owner is this individual who did that work, pushing people underground from just saying, I did this in a cafe, it was worth $100,
Right.
I agree with you. And I think that's why we need to chat with Will.
Yeah,
I think what it's worth also, the bill does say that you can do it if you're an unincorporated sole proprietorship. So if you're just one person that owns a coffee shop, that's okay. According to my reading of it anyway. Not saying that's a solution to the problem, but to the question, but
it's sadly it's a limited solution.
Right.
I think we need to have Will here in this conversation, because it is like trying to define corporation. Mm-hmm. How do you say, if they're good people, then they could contribute and could give us in-kind stuff. But if they're IBM or Vermont Yankee, if Vermont Yankee decides to give me an office and unlimited telephone, or they're not even here anymore, but assuming that they were, that's a corporate contribution.
Right.
And so we need to talk with Will about how we define this. And
are alligators if they're not in the swamp?
For what it's worth, years ago when we passed our comprehensive campaign finance bill, the one that the court struck down, I think in that one, buried in there was the ability to take a limited amount of in-kind services, talking about like if you put on a supper or you rented a space or something like that, and somebody not rented, but gifted you a space or whatever, it was okay as long as the value of it was below a certain amount of money. I forget what it was.
Well, now you can do that, but you report it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Keisha is saying is that,
Right. But
better to have it reported than figure out some convoluted way to not report it and have the activity go on anyway.
yes. And so we need to talk to Will.
Yeah.
Because there is a line. If Vermont Yankee gives me office space, unlimited phones, and 3 campaign aides, is that still just a nice little in-kind contribution? So we will talk to Will. We have this on the schedule and I cannot find my schedule, so I don't know, but we have it on again.
I
this
can
week.
tell you if it's on this week.
Well, it is. So let's jump to our next issue because I see we have Becky with us and we have Steve Howard. How blessed are we?
Oh,
And
Really, life is good. huh?
let's lay it on.
I meant because of Becky, not because of Steve Howard.
Oh, Becky, of course.
Senator, I was just
Thank you,
about to
Amarin.
I was just about to offer you Vincent his multiple phones for your next campaign.
And his podiums and his different rooms.
Yeah, he comes is fully equipped for anything. He's ready to go.
So I believe we are now looking at S43.
Oh, we are? Okay. Oh, yeah, we are.
Which is another bill that we passed last year. And
Yep.
as I remember, we passed it right before we left.
We passed the full Senate, right?
Yeah, we didn't pass it in the full Senate because there were some questions that people had some concerns about it and you were going to find answers for them. And then we vanished from the State House.
I don't remember the questions or the answers at this point.
Well, the main question was if we pass this, does this mean we can't ever change the benefits? That was
Right.
the main question. And
the answer to that is no.
yeah, but there were some unsettled feelings about it,
Yeah.
and then we left.
And then we left.
I mean, we left the State House and never came back.
Well, it just got eclipsed. How about that? It got
Oh.
eclipsed.
Becky, would you like to just give us a reminder of what this is and what we're looking at here?
Sure. So for the record, Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So S43 is it's a pretty short bill. What it is doing is adding in a new statutory section in the state employees retirement chapter. So this just has to do with the state employees system, and it's creating a contractual relationship between a member of the employees retirement system and the system that is established after a member's initial contribution to the system, and it's providing that no amendments can be made to that relationship that would lessen or impair these rights or benefits that are provided under this contractual relationship. So it is sort of codifying a contract between the members of the system and the system to their pension benefits and rights.
So, Madam Chair,
Yes. Yes.
so last year, as one of our many letters pointed out, the treasurer came to us and said, the pension system is in great shape. I mean, as long as we're continuing along the path we're on. And this year she's saying something, of course, completely different. I'm not sure we should be taking, I mean, and maybe I'm just not understanding it as fully as I should, But it strikes me that to take this up before we resolve the pension and retirement issue is tying our hands in a way that is inappropriate, given what sadly the treasurer has now put on the table, and is the elephant in the room we have to resolve, I think, before we go codifying this. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it does strike me that
I think the courts have already determined that I thought there were 3 steps that you have to do. One is it a contract? They have to figure out, is there a contract? Are the changes substantial? And is there a pressing public good need to make those changes? So they have to, and I thought the courts have already determined that our retirement system is a contract. Am I right, Becky?
So they made that determination with respect to certain aspects of benefits. I think to go to Senator Clarkson's question, depending on what changes you are looking to make to the system, some courts could decide that those are contract, have decided maybe those are contracts, some maybe that has not been sort of legally established yet. What this does is sort of establish that first prong of that test. Potentially, I think it could limit flexibility in what's done. But then you do, as you mentioned, Senator White, you do have to go through those other sort of prongs of the test. So it's not impossible to change anything. I think it
makes it harder. Wouldn't it?
It could potentially make it harder. I mean, it's hard for me to say without, analyzing a specific proposal. But I think there's, and I think the Vermont State Employees Association would sort of agree that this is the intent, that it is trying to make it harder to make a change.
And I appreciate that. I also appreciate that the VSEA is at the table willing to discuss this, whereas some other unions are not. So given that we have a problem that's been stated pretty clearly and a challenge that's been presented by the treasurer to all of us to address, that at least the Vermont State employees are also at the table trying to solve the problem, which I have to say I appreciate, given that other unions aren't. So I'm also acknowledging that the SEA is engaged with changing the contract, or maybe possibly changing the contract in some way. So I think it's complicated.
So Senator Polina, you had a comment?
Sorry.
Yeah, my belief is that what we're doing, if what this is intending to do is to codify what is now accepted practice, that the current Vermont administration believes that a pension is a contract. It's like the treasurer was here a week or so ago and agreed with that as well. And so it's codifying what is common practice now. It's just making it more clear, because the feeling is that we may end up someday with a different administration, with a different treasurer, with a different court decisions. And that could, what we're saying is we want the pension to be considered a contract today and tomorrow. We don't want to threaten that, because right now that is what the practice that we're operating under. Do you agree with that, Betsy, or does that make sense? Becky, does that make sense?
Yeah, so the case that is being referred to is the Burlington Firefighters case, which the courts basically said in that case that, accrued benefits in the pension plan become part of an employment contract. And that is, I think, what the administration is basing that's a legal analysis that's being used. So the courts have said that creates a contract. And they also said if there were any question as to whether this contract was impaired, they would use that sort of 3-step process that we just discussed about figuring out whether there was a substantial impairment to that process and whether that change was possible because of some sort of extraordinary necessary reason.
And where would that, I should know the answer to this, but where would that be taking place? Like the three-step process? Is it a contract? Is it substantial? Is there a public good?
That's something that would happen if there were a legal challenge in court.
So that would be after negotiations are over or have reached an impasse.
So I don't think it's in the negotiations process. I think if, for example, the legislature decides to make a change and then a member brings a legal challenge to that saying this change has impaired my contractual rights, then the court would make that determination, would go through that analysis to make the determination whether or not there was a contract that was impaired by that legislative action.
Given the debate going on around the pensions right now, if the pension were to change in such a way that some employees felt was really harmful to them, they could sue, I guess, the treasurer's office, or who would they be suing?
Usually the attorney general is the one who represents the state.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess they would sue the state.
Yeah, it would be the state, but the attorney general's office is the one that usually represents the state in those kinds of cases.
Becky would not have to.
No, I would not. I would not have to be in court defending it.
And this, just one last question. This, well, maybe not last, but this would apply to both retirees as well as current workers if they felt as if the pension system was changed in a way that was harmful to them?
Yeah, so this contractual relationship begins for a member once they've made an initial contribution to the system. That being said, the retiree benefits that you might be referring to, like OPEB and cost of living adjustments, are not, they have typically not been considered part of the retirement system in the same way that pension benefits are. So I don't know that this necessarily creates that same contractual right for those.
So they would have a weaker argument if they're retirees, given those kinds of changes. They would have a weaker argument.
Well, this is specifically saying that this contractual relationship is created with the retirement system. I think the health and medical benefits are not typically considered part of the retirement system. And the cost of living adjustment is calculated based on your retirement allowance, which is that calculation is part of the retirement system, but the adjustment and how that's calculated is, I think, is not necessarily a right under the retirement system.
Thanks.
Senator Collmore.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the process that this bill went through. It seems like, and I think Senator Polina sponsored it, it was referred to our committee in January, if I'm not mistaken, and then it just stayed on the calendar for month after month after month until Tim Ash, on the last day of the session in September, recommitted it back to our committee. So am I remembering correctly? And I think there was a House bill that was a mirror bill to this, and I don't know whether that ever made it out of a committee.
Yeah. My recollection, I don't know the exact dates, but I think, as the chair mentioned, that this was brought to the floor in sort of early March, and it was on the floor. I remember physically being in the State House, so early March. But then there were questions about the bill, so it was kind of passed over, but it might have been the actual week that the State House closed. So it was never kind of, it wasn't returned to. So I can't speak to why it wasn't returned to, like why it just kept getting passed over, but it was sort of on the floor at some point. And I think maybe it's just the COVID situation kind of happened and changed the trajectory of the session.
So did we ever pass it or not?
You
Yeah.
passed it out of committee.
Yes. It was, I can just look it up quickly and see what its history was.
We did pass it out of committee. It did not ever pass the Senate.
That's correct. Yeah.
And
I do-
what number was it, Becky?
I think it was 287.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Good memory.
287.
So are there any more questions for Becky right now?
Nope.
Steve, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. For the record, Steve Howard, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Employees Association. For the members of the Vermont State Employees Association, the agreement or the arrangement they have with the state of Vermont once they enter into the retirement system is, in their view, a contract. It is in their view that the state is making a commitment to them, that they're playing under a certain set of rules, and many have planned their entire career for the retirement that they basically believe they were promised. And they've planned for that. So they feel very strongly that the state, I look at this as the difference between living with somebody and marrying someone. And we've lived with the state for a long time, and it's now time to put a ring on it and make a commitment and basically say, we are going to provide this retirement to you. You can count on it, and we're going to do what it takes to make sure we provide that retirement for you. Now, why is that in the interest of the state? Retirement system is not just a benefit for teachers and for state employees. It is a significant benefit to the people of the state of Vermont who rely on skilled and experienced workers who staff our state agencies, who do many jobs that nobody else wants to do, and who put their lives often on the line to do those jobs. Those folks are attracted to state government when they might not otherwise be, and they stay longer and in those positions because of the promise of the retirement. And as a result of that tenure, that longer tenure, the people of Vermont gain their knowledge and experience, and their government is more effective in delivering services to your constituents than it might otherwise be. The other thing that's really important to remember is the retirement system is the state's most effective economic development program. More effective than anything else the Agency of Commerce does is the checks that go out every month. 78% of those state employees live in Vermont and spend money in the local diner, in the local store. It is probably the biggest economic stimulus program that the state of Vermont has. So having a law that basically says, rather than just saying we're going to follow what the court says, we want to make this commitment is very important to state employees. And it, I think, also is a way of sending a message to new employees. And we're going to need a lot of new employees if you look at the average age of state employees. It's to say that if you start with the state at a young age, you are going to be handed some information about the retirement plan. You can count on that retirement plan not being substantially changed by the time you get to the end of your career. So it's a way of saying we're going to put, we've given you our word, and now we're going to actually back that up by putting it into the law.
So Steve, I'll see if other people have questions, but we're talking here about the contributions to the retirement system, right? That what the percentage of what the employee pays and the percentage what the state pays. And we're talking about the pension payment itself, because we're not talking about the COLA or OPEB. So we're only talking about those two things. Am I wrong?
I think we're talking about the benefit.
but the benefit is the payment that you get in your pension check.
Mhm.
So,
And when you are qualified to receive that pension. So you have, part of what qualifies for normal retirement, for instance, changing those rules, and also what the benefit is that you receive.
so it's those three things that we're talking about, the contribution that the employee and the state make, the formula for when you are qualified to get that pension, and then the amount of the pension itself.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
might it also include other kind of more major changes, like going from defined benefits to defined contribution? Things like that, that would represent a change in the way the pension system is run.
Yeah,
Good-
yeah,
Good
but we're
point.
not talking about the healthcare benefits,
Right.
or, yeah.
No, we're talking about the pension itself.
Yeah, and I think there are also, like for some groups, like survivor benefits and disability benefits and things like that, that would are part of the benefits that sort of accrue to that particular group membership.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I think,
Yeah.
Senator, we would argue that the COLA, given the value of the pension, would also be part of the agreement. There's a lot of, I think the COLA probably has, the courts have had differing views on whether the COLA is part of the contract, but the VSEA views it as part of the contract, that you won't lose value of your pension over time.
Okay, thanks. Any questions or comments or concerns? I see, and maybe I shouldn't even be saying this, but I see that there, on the one side, we want to say this is an additional protection right now because of what we're dealing with. And on the other side, hearing people say, but we shouldn't be doing this at the same time that we're dealing with this crisis. We should. So I'm not sure where I am on that, but I do see that it is an issue right now, and that might be. I don't know if that would complicate what we're doing with the pensions right now. I mean, with the whole system, or if it would make it easier, or by the time this got passed, it wouldn't make any difference because that would all be behind us. I don't know.
Well, I think, Madam Chair, our members have put forward a set of principles that we've communicated with the leadership of both chambers, and the California principle, or the Burlington Firefighters decision, is maybe to put more of a Vermont spin on it, is part of that package. So the state employees believe that, first of all, to solve the pension problem that we're talking about this year, we need a comprehensive summer study committee to look at why the investment returns have not met their targets and what needs to change about those investment returns, so that this process needs to slow down and take a look at the underlying problem. We've talked in this committee before, and you've heard me talk about the support that we have expressed for Senator Hooker's bill. We've just gotten the actuarial reports back from that show very positive impact on the pension fund, with a lot of this unfunded liability being eliminated very quickly, or much more quickly than we thought it would be, as a result of the Senator Hooker's approach. We've also said that we think that the California principle needs to be part of any solution, or the Burlington Firefighters principle and codifying that needs to be part of any solution that we could agree to. I think that's really sort of the direction that we are going in, from the perspective of our members.
Anybody else?
I just got shocked I haven't seen Damian Leonard ever. I just saw him for the first time with his goatee. I didn't know who it was.
Oh, it's
looks-
a full beard.
Who is that guy and what have you done with Damian Leonard?
Well, he kind of looks like he's in witness protection.
Yeah, he's very, Damien, you're very backlit.
Yeah,
It's okay. It's just fine.
It's nap time around here, so I'm retreating to the quietest corner of the house.
Oh, how nice. How lovely.
So,
Senator White, I think that, we passed this out on March 11th last year. And it sat, as Brian said, it just sat on that calendar through September. And I don't mean to say I don't support the concept of this. I think it's very important to have done this, or I wouldn't have voted for it last year. But I do think that what's in front of us also this year complicates action on this right now. And I don't know why that's bothering me. I mean, it just sits there and I can't resolve. I'm having a hard time resolving that right now. So maybe I just have to think about it for a couple of days.
So I am going to suggest that I wanted us to just get these topics in front of us today, and we'll take them up again, but I wanted to make sure that we got them in front of us again so that we didn't forget them.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to suggest that because we have Pat Gable and Joseph McNeil with us, and I believe, Becky, this is Damien's bill, S78.
Yeah, that's Damien's bill.
Okay. So Becky, we have this on the schedule again at the end of the week, I believe, but I, for some reason, seem to have lost my schedule. So I'm not sure when, but Gail will let you know.
I can tell you, it's S43. I do not see it on our schedule.
I don't have it on my schedule thus far, but
It's not on our schedule this week.
Okay, so it's the week we come back then. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks.
And
Yes.
you also asked Jeanette when we were taking up S51 again, and we don't have that scheduled this week.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I
Well,
sent
we
you an
need to be a
email
little-
asking if you wanted to do that on Friday, so you can take a look at the schedule and get back to me.
I'll look at the schedule. We want to be as flexible as possible right now so that we can make sure that we get things out that we need to get out. So if okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you. All right, so let's skip to S78, which is last year. Again, we passed, I don't know what the number was last year, but it had to do with and I think that Tucker said the other day that the issue we were dealing with then was the first time he ever got to draw anything on our blackboard. And I got to draw. Do you remember we drew this whole little tree thing about if yes, you go here, if no, you go here.
Yes.
About this bill. And this, and I have to admit, it was a really good visual.
And I think someone took a picture of it.
And this related to the ability to having binding arbitration for state employees in the executive branch. And S78 is the same bill, but for the judicial branch. And we took some testimony on this last year, I believe, but we didn't take much. So, Damien, would you like to walk us through this bill? And then And then I think I was going to try and put this on the end of this week again, but I know that Patricia has to be out of town Thursday and Friday. So we'll, if we don't finish today, which we probably won't, we'll take it up again the week we come back. So Damien, do you want to walk us through this so we know what we're saying here?
Yes, sorry. Taking me a second to click through. Let me just pull up the bill and then I'll share my screen and we'll be ready
It's
to
on
go.
it's on our website.
Yeah, we
Yep.
do all have.
I've got it. I've got it. Do you want to look at it on your own devices or do you prefer if I share it on the screen?
I'll speak for myself. I can see it better on my own device.
Yeah, me too.
I prefer that also just because then I can see people.
Sounds good. I'll do it that way. Both ways work really well for me. So, so the bill, as you mentioned, this passed the Senate last year, and this bill reruns what passed the Senate last year. So there was a slightly different bill introduced last year, and that this was just introduced as what passed. So what it does is it takes the language that we enacted, and by we, I mean the General Assembly, enacted last biennium with respect to the executive branch, and would enact it for the judiciary with respect to providing the option for either party. If you look in section 1 here, beginning on line 20 of page 1, upon the request of either party, you could take negotiations that have reached impasse, and then if you go on to page 2, they could be submitted to a binding arbitrate or to an arbitrator mutually agreed on by the parties. And if the parties can't agree on an arbitrator, to the American Arbitration Association. So what this means is when you're in contract negotiations and you reach binding impasse or a bargaining impasse, excuse me, what happens is you have two options. The first default is that you go to the Vermont Labor Relations Board, which is the current process. The second option would be that if either party elected to do so, the parties would go to binding arbitration in front of a private arbitrator that they would either mutually agree to or it would be selected, appointed by the American Arbitration Association. The new language beginning on line 5 adds a requirement that the last best offer be filed under seal. Again, this is consistent with the State Employees Labor Relations Act. And then not unsealed and placed in the public record until both parties' last best offers have been filed. And that's on lines 7 and 8. And then the changes on line 9 there, it used to provide that the board could, but wasn't required to hold a hearing and consider the recommendations of the fact finder. And now it's become a shall hold one or more hearings on the issue. The next piece of new language is on lines 14 to 19. This allows the board or the arbitrator, if they find the last best offers of both parties to be unreasonable and likely to produce undesirable results or result in a long-lasting negative impact on the parties' bargaining relationship, then the board or the arbitrator could select the recommendation of the fact finder that had been issued earlier on in the dispute resolution process. Moving on to page 3, there's just a couple of more tweaks in the language for that dispute resolution section. And then what section 2 does, the Judiciary Labor Relations Act currently has the option for the parties to agree in advance to pursue mediation and arbitration instead of the standard procedure that would place them in front of the board. And so this strikes out that old language and instead replaces it with this provision where the election comes after the fact finder's determination has been made. If they can't resolve that dispute within 20 days after the fact finder transmits their findings and recommendation, then the parties, then either party could request at that time to go to an arbitrator. So this is a different process. The current process allows the parties to agree ahead of time to pursue mediation and arbitration as their dispute resolution process. The new proposed process would have the parties go through the standard mediation and fact-finding process, and then at the end of that, the default is go to the board. The option that either party could elect is to go to binding arbitration. And then the last section of the bill is just the effective date, which would be July 1, 2021. And that is it for the bill. I'm not aware of an issue with a current contract caused by that effective date, but if the committee moves forward on this, I think you just want to check with the judiciary and VSEA that there isn't an issue with the effective date.
Thank you. Any questions of clarification for Damien?
I don't know who made the flow chart, but thank you. I always appreciate that.
Oh, is that my flow chart from last year?
Where is the flow chart?
Oh, Gail just sent it to us.
Oh, great. Sorry, I was looking at the bill. I'm glad. Is it on the, it's not posted though. Right. Okay. It's in the email.
Okay, I was just redoing the flow chart here as we were. So this was brought to us by VSEA. So I'm going to ask Steve to talk to us about this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Steve Howard, I'm executive director. I'm still executive director of the VSEA. Nothing's changed in the last 20 minutes. I want to, first of all, thank you for your leadership in passing this legislation as it relates to the law, the current law that applies to the executive branch. VSEA feels very strongly that the collective bargaining process was one that was fully executed as a result of the hammer of the arbitrator. When management knows that they can go to a politically appointed labor board for a decision, they don't engage in collective bargaining in the same way as we experienced. They participated in the last round of negotiations, which led to an agreement at the table. And I think that we all agree that that's the goal. And the threat of the arbitrator is really one that is equal. It's equally shared by both management and labor because it's an independent person. It's often somebody who's not connected politically at all to Vermont. It's completely independent and is an expert on collective bargaining, who knows what the contract, does the research to see what the surrounding contracts in the geographic area have been like, who look at the arguments that both sides make during the hearing before the arbitrator and can make a really independent decision. It's really quite frankly, a giant risk to go to an arbitrator, just like it would be to go to a jury. And because of that, it incentivizes the parties to come to an agreement at the table. We experience that in the executive branch. We think the judiciary would also benefit from the ability to go to an independent, non-political expert who has often very little connection to the political establishment in Vermont and is just making a decision on the merits, which is what our members ask for. So I appreciate the change that you made for the executive branch. It has worked extremely well in bringing the parties to an agreement, and I hope that you will extend it to the judiciary as well.
Thank you. I am going to say that for, we'll hear from Patricia Gable next, but I'm going to say that for the benefit of Senator Rum, who was not here last year and didn't get to hear all of the debates, if you would like, we can see if we could schedule Tim Noonan to come and give us kind of a Labor Relations Board Negotiations 101, which he did for us last year. And I think we can replicate that if you would like. So you don't have to answer now, but just.
I can answer now just to give whoever's
Okay.
listening in or hear certainty. I mean, when I was on House General, we had Tim Noonan in a lot, and I think I had some 101 around that. And I just want to appreciate some of the folks on this call wondered if I needed some extra information about this issue before it came up in committee and have briefed me. So I feel pretty good about it now.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yep. Okay, so any questions for Steve around this right now? Okay, Pat?
Hello, committee members, and thank you, Madam Chair, for managing the schedule in a way that I would be able to appear before you. I appreciate it. I know it's a tough week to do that, and I appreciate the courtesy and the respect that you showed to me that way. We did have an opportunity to testify on this before, and some of you may recall that. You may recall that the judiciary does not support the bill. We believe the law, relying on the Vermont Labor Relations Board process, is actually a very good process for Vermont. And unlike, parts of government, there are parts of government that don't always work well, but the Vermont Labor Relations Board is one of the parts of government that's quite admirable. And we don't win a lot of cases necessarily in front of them, but we do feel that we get a knowledgeable hearing. And we also, I don't agree with the characterization that board members who are appointed by the governor makes them any more political than it makes judges who are also appointed by the governor. I think most people who have court cases, they may like or not like the decision they get from a judge, but we don't have partisan decision making in Vermont, and I think that's true in the Vermont Labor Relations Board as well. We also don't agree that taking what is currently a government process, and there's already funding in the general fund for this process, and spending money to bring in a private party, usually from out of state, who will have no stake in whether or not the outcome is good for Vermont, is a good process. And it's kind of unusual. Usually the VSEA is arguing that private services should not be provided for government function. And yet in this case, it's kind of reversed. And Joe McNeil, who's our chief negotiator, is much more experienced in this area than I am, and so I will defer some of the technical questions, but he can explain to you about the costs of private arbitration. They're borne both by the VSEA through, I guess it's member dues, and by us in the general fund, the money that's appropriated to us. And we feel this is a duplicative expense that isn't necessary. I'll leave it to Joe. Oh, and by the way, I should say, yesterday I did send a written memorandum on these points to the committee. Just before I got on, I didn't see it posted. And so Gail, I think you would have gotten it yesterday. And so if it's not posted, you may wish to do that. But the points that I'm making are covered in a written memorandum.
My apologies for that, Pat. When the schedule was subject to change, I did not post it. I will do that right now. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I understand. As I said, it's been quite a week generally in scheduling around, so I understand that. The VLRB process involves the final and binding hearing being conducted before a 3-member panel. And that involves one of whom is appointed from a management background. So there's a diverse committee that comes together and identifies people from a management background. One is from a labor background, and one is from a neutral background. And this historic methodology assures neutrality, fairness, and a decision based on the merits of the matter as much as possible. The VLRB is also designated by statute as the final and binding adjudicator of grievances that can arise between the parties under the collective bargaining agreement. And as a result, the VLRB generally becomes aware of bargaining disputes that have arisen between the parties under whatever the current contract is. And that can help them make more informed decision making, much more informed than would be the case if a private arbitrator is brought in on a one-off purpose to decide a bargaining matter. The VLRB process typically involves the additional step of a pre-hearing conference between its executive director and the representatives of the parties. And the issues in dispute are discussed, the facts of the matter and the applicable law are discussed. The amounts are, if there's an additional mediation session, they're available to do that, and they often do that. And historically, that process has sometimes resulted in the settlement of the matter in disputes between the VSEA and the executive branch without the necessity for a hearing at significant savings to both parties in terms of both time and money. Also, the VLRB process involves a stenographic record, again, just like court. That doesn't typically happen in a private arbitration procedure. And the ability during the proceeding to request questions and answers be read back and the like. That's part, again, of this kind of quasi-judicial process. In an arbitration proceedings, the more typical custom is for the arbitrator to rely upon his or her own notes or a tape, which are more complicated to work with. Another really helpful aspect of the VLRB process is the issuance of a written decision, which not only sets forth the determination of the issue, but also an analysis for the basis for the decision. Again, much like a court case. This decision-making process creates an important precedent guide for the parties for their future interaction with one another. And cases are collected and either side can look and see, gee, in the past, how has the VLRB handled certain kinds of issues? And so the VLRB doesn't just ultimately decide a case, but they do provide an important resource that tries to encourage constructive labor relationships in Vermont. And so, and I would also say we were able to successfully reach a collective bargaining agreement last year, and it didn't require any kind of special pressure from some private entity to do that. The challenges in collective bargaining are great. Neither side really wants the process to drag out, and it's the exception rather than the rule that we're not able to reach an agreement. And so for those reasons, and there are many more, but I know we don't have time, we oppose the bill and support that the law's current process be in place. And before I ask Joe to weigh in, again, he's really the technical expert in this area. I just wonder if the committee has any questions for me, or maybe you'd like to defer your questions till Joe's had a chance to speak.
Committee, do you have? Well, let's hear from Joe first, and then we can wrap any questions for both of you.
Okay.
And I'm just for your information, I'm going to stand up for 1 minute here because I need to just stand up. Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members, for hearing us. Hello, Steve. How are you? Just a few supplemental points with regard to the bill and the position of the judiciary. Over the last, since about 1990 now, it's getting long of tooth. I have pretty consistently represented both the executive branch and the judiciary in bargaining with Vermont State Employees Association. And I would take respectful exception to the notion that it was the addition of the option of private arbitrator, and I'll get to the option statement in a second, that led to settlement of the last round. But even aside from that, the best proof is that there have been a multitude of contracts negotiated and settled, both at the executive branch level, and there's several separate units there, as you know, the state, the non-management, the supervisors, the corrections unit, and the state police used to be in VSEA, now are in a separate organization. But generally speaking, we have settled at the table, and it is our mutual motivation to be able to do that. We don't take exception to Steve's statement that that is the mutual goal. We've largely accomplished it, and largely accomplished it under the rubric where the last best offer, if we had to go to it, was by the Labor Relations Board. In addition, I would point out that as Damien described the bill to you, he indicated that the default was to the Labor Relations Board. That's actually not precisely the case in practice. Although it's somewhat stated that way, the default is clearly to private arbitration in the bill that you have in front of you, because either party has the option of saying, I don't want to use the labor board. I want to use a private arbitrator, and that becomes the mandate. So as we see it, the default is to the private arbitration. Pat pointed out that in this last round, even though the bill indicated, the current law is that we go to the Labor Relations Board for last best offer, that settlement was reached. I would point out to the committee that there has never been a judiciary dispute since the time it was organized that has not been settled in advance of last best offer proceedings. So there is no occasion based in the judiciary to have any reason to distinguish between the VLRB and private arbitration on the basis of judiciary experience in last best offer. In addition to grievances, as Pat pointed out, unfair labor practices that are brought primarily by the union against the state of Vermont or the judiciary are adjudicated by the VLRB. So we have a situation where the VLRB would continue to adjudicate 3/4 or 2/3 of the matters that come before them, grievances and unfair labor practice charges, and yet we would be electing against this forum for last best offer arbitrations. It does not seem like a good balanced way to go. We'd also point out that, as Pat indicated, you invest, we all as taxpayers invest quite a bit of money year in and year out in the structure of our Vermont Labor Relations Board. They have physical space that the state rents over on Baldwin Street. They have hearing rooms. They hire stenographers. There's the board expense, the executive director and staff expense. All of that is embedded in the cost of government already. And what we're being asked to do instead is to pay a private arbitrator on the whim of either side. And I can tell you without any hesitation that currently the going rate for experienced arbitrators that are utilized in Vermont is somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 a day. And it is not atypical. I'll give you an example. Although we've never gone to last best offer in the judiciary, we did have on one bargaining round a very extensive fact-finding process. And as Damien indicates, that precedes last best offer. We went 5 full days of hearing on the fact-finding over primarily one issue, but the unsettled contract. And then the arbitrator required like 3 days of preparation time and writing a decision. That created a significant bill to the judiciary and also to VSEA. So the question is this additional cost going to bring any greater degree of fairness or any better degree of justice to our jurisprudence in the labor side in Vermont? And we'd respectfully argue that it does not. And the last point I would make is that when we were with you a year ago discussing the then bill, it was noteworthy that in addition to the executive branch, the bill covered the University of Vermont and the state college system within its scope. And in your wisdom, between then and now, you elected to have the VLRB remain the forum of jurisdiction for both the University of Vermont and for the state college system. And we would respectfully submit that as a separate branch of government that has never found even need to use the LBO process in bargaining, but respects it because of its balanced nature and because of what both Pat and I have already spoken to, that the judiciary should receive the same result that you applied to the state colleges and to the University of Vermont when you decided to exclude them from this change. So for those reasons, in addition to those by Court Administrator Gable, we support the current format. I would add that the technical changes that Damien covered, other than the question of who does the last best offer proceeding, are all acceptable to us. Those we take no exception to. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a couple comments and I'll open it up for comments and questions by the committee. But I do think that in terms of the state colleges and UVM, we determined the reason we removed them is because they're not really state employees the way members of the judiciary are indeed state employees. But UVM and the state college system, while they're instrumentalities of the state, they are not state employees. And I just, in terms of looking at the Labor Relations Board, I know that one of the impetuses for this, I believe, was a very an appointment that was fraught with a lot of discontent because of the nature of that particular appointment. And I would wonder if it would not, when you get to if you've gone through mediation, you've already gone through a lot, mediation and fact finding. And the fact that most people don't ever get to that very bottom step in negotiations, and the judiciary never has in negotiations, that if there was distrust of the Labor Relations Board by either party, which could happen, because we could have a governor who decides that somebody who should be the management appointee really has been a union organizer for all these years and now has a job in management, and so appoints. So there could be distrust for both sides here. And in that case, I would wonder if the union might oppose the Labor Relations Board, but in a case like that, might not the judiciary itself think that appointment was politically motivated and therefore distrusted the opinion of the Labor Relations Board, which I think is one of the things that brought this to light. Well, just a couple comments. So committee, does anybody, Senator Collmore, see?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's probably a question for Damien more than anyone. I believe the bill last year was S307. I'm wondering if this bill, S78, in this current session, has any changes in it that are substantial.
There we go. Took a second to get my mute to turn off there. Sorry about that. The answer is no. What I did was essentially take last year's bill as it passed the Senate and just put it into a new bill. The only thing I did in that process was check to make sure that any minor changes that might have occurred when we republished the supplements for the statutes were incorporated.
And obviously effective dates.
Yeah, effective dates. And if there are any changes, it's minor grammatical changes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Senator Rum?
Thank you. Kind of building off of your comments, Madam Chair, I've just been sort of sitting here pondering how different I feel like it is to be appointed to the Labor Relations Board versus appointed as a judge. You know, one is really fairly judicial, one's quasi-judicial. And so I just didn't know if anybody wanted to follow up or clarify that statement, because I do believe they're held to quite different standards of impartiality.
Well, I think that probably both Senator Collmore and I can speak to the judicial nominating procedure, which is very complicated. We're in the middle of it right now. We receive reams of information on each appointee. They go through a very intensive process with the Judicial Nominating Board, and references are checked and interviews by the board. And then the board itself votes on who is well qualified and sends those names to the governor. So unlike I don't believe there's any similar process for nominations to the appointments to the Vermont Labor Relations Board. I think they're just appointed by the governor.
I had, each committee they're given to the Economic Development Committee, and I had the candidate that was so controversial. And we are asked actually to speak with them, to speak with other people who work with them, and to make a recommendation to the committee. The committee discusses it and makes a decision about what they're going to recommend. It's a much shorter version, and not every committee does that amount of work on their but on the Labor Relations Board, we do actually quite a bit of work, at least I have, that I've experienced.
And it's for confirmation, right? Not for the appointment. The appointment has already been made.
The appointment
And now you're
that
confirming.
was just the point I was going to make. It is for confirmation. It is not for nomination.
Right.
So, Madam Chair, may I mention something that,
Yes, Pat.
maybe your members already know that. There is a process where people who apply to sit on the labor board are reviewed, and there are, I should have checked the statute this year, but I didn't. So the court administrator is one of the parties. There's a union representative. In other words, it's not, it's by no means as vigorous as the judicial nominating board process, because the position is different and the stakes are different. But there is I participated in many meetings, though not the one that was controversial, about different potential vacancies that needed to be filled. And the meetings in which I participated were really thoughtful because the people who are reviewing the applicants also come from these different backgrounds. And at least in the ones that I participated in, a true attempt was made. If it was a labor position, we really wanted to make sure it was someone who was a labor person. And if it was a management person, we were looking for that. And, what is a neutral person? That was always in those discussions, what does that mean in the context of a person's career? So it may or may not be that not every choice is perfect, but there is a process, and people do take it seriously and recognize that the quasi-judicial decisions that are being made, they impact the lives of employees, they impact the taxpayers of the state. As I said, when I said it had a process similar to a judge, I didn't mean it was the same process. It's clearly not that.
Joe, did you want to comment on?
Yes, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. As I indicated, the VLRB is utilized regardless of the actions on this bill for very important matters involving VSEA and the state of Vermont and the judiciary, as well as for UVM and for the state colleges. And if there is some problem perceived or real with the selection process for the VLRB, it might be argued that the better attention is to fix whatever problem exists so that the VLRB can go on administering cases in a way that not only the unions, but the employers and the public can have confidence in their decisions. I think to revert to an entirely different system because of a concern over one appointment, if that's what it comes down to, is, hate to use the expression, but throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because the board remains an important, critically important part of Vermont's overall jurisprudence. And it would be better to fix it than to just simply avoid the question on LBOs, but keep the same concern, if the concern is real, for issues like unfair labor practices and grievances.
I think we did try to fix it a number of years ago because as I remember it, it used to be political parties. They were appointed by political party, and I was in the legislature when we changed that to try to get rid of that partisan approach. And I didn't mean to imply that was the only reason why this came up. I just know that was kind of a kick in the butt, maybe, to get it going. So Steve, did you want to comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd say just a couple of things. First of all, that this really isn't a result of just the controversial appointment, but what that controversial appointment exposed, which is that a governor can use the process to try to seat somebody inappropriately on the labor board. And what Mr. McNeil and Ms. Gable aren't telling you is the process that is very different from the judicial nominating process that leads to the candidates being sent up to the governor is one that's extremely weighted towards management. In fact, Ms. Gable, who is management, serves on that committee, as does the Commissioner of Labor, appointed by the governor. The labor representative is actually appointed by the governor. So if you're a friend of the governor's, you might make it onto that panel and get to decide who goes to the VLRB, and that's in fact in that controversial appointment what happened. There was a lot of evidence of communication between the governor's appointees and the labor representative on that panel. The other thing I would just say is that there's probably no other jurisdiction in the country where the same board that rules on grievances and unfair labor practices that might be filed as a result of management's performance or behavior during the contract negotiation process also decides the contract. That is what we view as a very serious conflict, and one that is alleviated, particularly when there has been ULPs filed, by choosing to go to an outside independent expert that has really no political allegiances, but really is making the decision based on facts and on the arguments and on the merit and on the fairness of or the accuracy of the arguments that are presented to them. So it's sad. I'm sad to see that Tim Newton is leaving. He's retiring. I think that's a big loss for the state. But certainly, this is an opportune time to be building consistency between the judiciary and the executive. And really, I thought your suggestion, Madam Chair, with the chart, and I know Damien gets credit for the chart that you saw, but you drew one on the back of an envelope, I believe, that I personally prefer.
But Damien made it look beautiful.
He did.
I actually have to say, I don't think this chart was the one I was thinking of. I think someone else made this one. So
it might have been
someone else gets
actually
credit.
Senator Bray that made it look beautiful.
I think your
I think it was Gail.
Oh, Gail.
Yeah.
It might have been Gail. It could have been Gail.
Yeah.
It was certainly well done. It was certainly well done.
See, look, the thumbs
yeah.
are up. She says yes.
Yeah, it is Gail's credit on that one, not mine. I misspoke.
I thought that the chair's suggestion that it be, the choice of whether you go to the VLRB or whether you go to the arbitrator really made sense, because then the parties could look at the circumstances of the negotiation, look at the circumstances of the discussion, and decide what they thought would be fair. And what's really critical isn't really whether we pay rent for the VLRB. What really is fair is, do the people involved in this process believe this is a fair process? And it's not stacked, and it's not political, and it's not one that they don't have confidence in. And I have to say, having an arbitrator and the ability to go to arbitration has renewed faith among our membership in the executive branch that the process isn't stacked, and that it is a fair, independent process, because you can go to an arbitrator. So I really think that's an important distinction between the comparison of appointing a judge that goes through the judicial nominating process, in which many of you play a role, and one in which the governor chooses the panel which makes the recommendation. I think that's very different.
So, Joe, I'm going to call on you a second. I
Sure.
just want to make a comment here. I do understand the issue of changing the process and potential costs. But if the judiciary has never gotten to that point, and I maybe I misheard, but I thought you said you'd never used the VLRB for negotiations. It's used for other grievances and decisions, but never for. So if you've never gotten to that point, then we're just making a change of a point which you've never gotten to in the first place. Or did I misunderstand that?
Well, in part, yes, Madam Chair. In part, no. The judiciary has used the VLRB in connection with negotiations, in that unfair labor practices have come up around or charges have come up around negotiations or the impact of negotiations. So the VLRB has been very active around the negotiation process.
Yeah.
What we haven't had to do is use the VLRB for last best offer,
Right.
because we've never reached last best offer. I would say that in my full experience, though, and I think I have a handle on the entire experience of VSEA with its bargaining with the state on the executive branch side. Last best offer has only been used 3 times across several decades. And the results have been 2 decisions that went in favor of the VSEA and 1 decision that went in favor of the state of Vermont. And the same, if you will, the same prophylactic or incentive to settle that would exist with a private arbitrator exist equally with the Vermont Labor Relations Board, because the process in the statute is not is what we call baseball arbitration or winner take all. The way the arbitration process works for state employee and judicial bargaining is that the arbitrator does not get to pick and choose among issues, say, I like your position on this and your position on that. They have to pick one side in its entirety unless they're going to pick the fact finder's report. So that creates in and of itself a significant incentive to find settlement if you possibly can, because the risk of loss is great on both sides. The other thing I just want to indicate is that my experience I've done dozens of cases with both private arbitrators and with the VLRB. I don't think it's possible to say, on the basis of my experience, that one forum is more consistent, more attentive to the facts and the law than the other. But what I can say definitively is that for the most part, Vermont Labor Relations Board decisions tend to be fully explicated, if you will. They tend to tell you what facts they're finding, what law they find controlling, and why they make the decision that they do. By contrast, private arbitrators, including arbitrators from the AAA list, tend to be more curt in their analysis, more summary in their determinations than is the VLRB jurisprudence. So I would just urge that sometimes the devil that you see is at least as good as the devil that you don't. Where we have an existing system that has been constructed for the purpose of fairness, if it's not delivering fairness, it ought to be attended to. I happen to think it is for the most part. Maybe with a one-off aberration that one side took exception to. But I'd be inclined to argue that that should be fixed, because if it needs to be fixed, I certainly would recommend that you hear from Tim Noonan, who has more experience than anyone in their jurisprudence. And the last point I would make, and I'd hate to take issue with the chair, and the chair is absolutely right that they're not state employees, but they are 100% funded by the state. And so the well, not in UVM's case, I'll take that back. It's not 100.
State college either.
But nonetheless, they use a bargaining process that was originally in this bill, and enough said. I heard you there.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they were in the bill to begin with, but clearly they're not state employees in the same way that state employees are state employees. They don't get the same benefit package. They don't have the, it's very different. And they're in the case of UVM, for example, very little of their salary is actually paid by the state because we give the university so little money. So anyway, any other questions or comments, concerns?
Just if I may, on that one point, if that were to be the case, if that is the case, then one might ask, why does UVM and the state colleges, why did you decide that they should continue to use the state apparatus, the state's embedded apparatus for their dispute resolution, and those that are employed by the state should use an entirely separate and distinct, more costly apparatus for that same result? It just doesn't respectfully seem consistent.
Yeah, I can see that point. Actually, we didn't decide that those who are employed by the state didn't have the right to use the VLRB. They do have the right to use the VLRB if both sides agree. It's only if one of the sides objects for some reason that they would go to arbitration. But we would hope that it never gets to that point to begin with, that the contract itself doesn't. And that if it does, that maybe both sides are confident in the objectivity of the current VLRB. So that. So any more comments? Or I think, committee, the way we should approach this is we should take some time to think about this. I did have it back on the schedule on Friday, but going to take it off because Pat can't be here. And I think that I would not want to do this without the ability for her to be joining us. Senator Clarkson?
Yeah, and I think it would be good to have Tim come and join us for a moment. I think Joseph's point is a good one, which is, partly don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, I think it's worth looking at the VLRB nominating process and seeing if there was something that we could fix in that so that we're not just rubber stamping, but have a more active hand in the nomination process.
Well, if we took that on in this bill or at this time, it would mean we would not do anything before crossover.
Yeah, no, I realize that. I'm just curious if that's something long-term we might be interested in doing.
Yeah, but it took a lot of conversation last time we changed it. I don't think it was the Government Operations Committee that changed it, actually, not Economic Development.
I don't know when it was last changed, which is part of why I'd love to hear from Tim.
It was within the last 18 years because I was here.
Well, I was not on a committee that was dealing with it.
No, it was before you were in the Senate. Steve, do you remember?
But I mean,
yes, I do. As I said earlier, the controversial appointment did expose a lot. And one of the things it did expose was that there were very few reference checks. And I think the change that was most recently made was one in which the panel that is appointed mostly by the governor or encompassed of the governor's appointees or managers did very few checks on with anybody. Like, for instance, when they were nominating that candidate for the labor seat, nobody ever spoke to any of the labor unions about how they would feel about somebody from a labor busting law firm being appointed to a labor seat. So that was one change that was made. I believe it was Senator Sorokin's proposal that your committee considered and passed.
If I may, just one technical correction. Steve is not correct about the fact that there was no check with any labor organization in that controversial appointment. It became clear as that unfolded that the problem was that the Secretary of Labor had, or the Commissioner of Labor had spoken only to one labor union, spoke to the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, who had experience with the individual that ended up being appointed. And the statute said that use the term labor unions in the plural. So the technical problem was speaking only to one. It is true that so far as I'm aware, there was no conversation with VSEA.
Or the NEA, the two major labor unions in the state, the AFT. Like almost every major labor union in the state was left out.
I'd take issue with the notion that AFSCME and IBEW are not major unions in the state, but that's for another day.
So when I was referring to the changes made, I was referring to when we actually changed it from being partisan appointments to the current, which is at least looking at having a balance between management and labor, but the old system had none of that. So, so committee, what I would suggest is that this is Wednesday, and Thursday and Friday we will not take this up. We could take it up, but I really don't. I think it's best to not take it up if Pat can't be with us. Is that okay, committee? Because we will see if we can get Tim, and we'll potentially take it up for the Tuesday that we come back, which would be, I think, the 9th. Yeah, 9th.
Yeah, it's Tuesday the 9th.
Does that meet everybody's needs? I mean, I know it's a long time from now to commit to, but
actually,
Pat,
it'll go by like a blink.
That's fine.
I did not print a record of action this time, so I will wait.
Okay, so I think that's what we'll do. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for coming again.
Yeah,
thank you, Damien.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks,
You're welcome.
everybody.
Thank you.